Hey guys, Marcus Melnick here with Firearm Mentor. Hope you're enjoying my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. These little things are free to you and really help the channel. I appreciate your support. Enjoy. Thank you.
The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters. Greetings and welcome back to the Personal Safety Show. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor and Stress to Logic, your host. In the first part of our episode, we talked about the terrorism that occurred this last week. And unfortunately, I think that January, and again, this is gut feeling based upon experience, January may experience some more civil unrest. I've said that since the results of the election. The Cybertruck explosion outside of Trump Towers is indicative of this. Like, if you're going to do some terrorism, ooh, that's interesting, outside of Trump Towers. He's the president. He owns Trump Towers. So I would love for everyone to stay safe and not take undue and unnecessary risks, particularly tomorrow, which is January 6th, and that's when Congress is going to verify the election, or certify the election is the right word. And we all know what happened 4 years ago, the quote insurrection. Now, depends on your viewpoint. There are people who are on the left and in the middle who say it was an insurrection. It was they tried to overturn the election. And then now it's interesting. There's people on the right that are saying, yeah, who was the real insurrectionist? Did you steal the election? I'm not giving you my opinion on that. I do have an opinion. But in the reality, and we've had someone on the show who was actually there on January 6th. If you go back into the archives, you can check it out. Quite interesting. But I don't think there was any insurrection. That requires some organization. Chaos, yes. Riot, yes. Violence, yes. But an organized insurrection, I mean, my opinion is I don't think that's what it was. I think there were people that were in the wrong. There are people in the right. You have the right to protest. You have the right to free speech. And I'm cool with that. I'm not cool with you don't have the right to commit violence. So there's the rabbit hole runs deep. But in any event, my wife and I always have these conversations and, what's wrong with people? Why do people do this? How come we can't prevent this? And in reality, a lot of the nefarious activities are prevented. And I have a specific example here. The last week, the FBI seized one of the largest stockpiles of homemade explosives in history. Federal agents found one of the largest stockpiles of homemade explosives when they entered and they seized and arrested a Virginia man on a firearms charge last month, according to court filings by federal prosecutors. Investigators seized more than 150 pipe bombs and other homemade devices when they searched the home of Brad Spafford, northwest of Norfolk, can't say that right, in December, prosecutors said in a motion filed last Monday. Prosecutors wrote that this is believed to be the largest seizure by number of finished explosives in FBI history. The discovery comes in the U.S. as a period of heightened tension over political violence. Last year's presidential election campaign saw 2 assassination attempts against Donald Trump before he eventually won the race for White House against Vice President Harris. Most of the bombs were found in a detached garage in the home in Isle, along with tools and bomb-making materials, including fuses and pieces of plastic pipe, according to court documents. Prosecutors also stated that several additional apparent pipe bombs were found in a backpack in the home's bedroom, completely unsecured, in the home he shares with his wife and 2 young children. Now, I'm an advocate of lock up your guns, also lock up your bombs. And I'm being facetious here, okay? When I say lock up anything that could be dangerous, caustic substances, lye, if you have little children, this is just a general safety tip. Lock you've got these locks you can put on cabinets. Dude, something's wrong there. So the offender was charged with possession of a firearm in violation of the National Firearms Act, and officers allege he owned an unregistered short-barreled rifle. Maybe he built it by himself. Those are not, I wouldn't do it because it's a pain in the rear end, but you can build your own firearms. There's numerous additional potential charges related to the explosives. Defense attorneys argued in a motion on Tuesday that authorities had not produced evidence that he was planning violence, also noting he had no criminal record. Further, they questioned whether the explosive devices were usable because profoundly trained explosive technicians had to rig the devices to explode them. There's not a shred of evidence in the record that the offender ever threatened anyone, and the contention that someone might be in danger because of their political views and comments is nonsensical, the defense lawyers wrote. Let me tell you how many bombs I have in my house. None. I don't have explosives. It's ridiculous. Now, growing up, did we have explosives in the house? Yes. We reloaded. My dad worked in the garage. We had acetone. We had gasoline. Are those explosives? Yes, but they're not assembled in a way that could really explode. This investigation began in 2023 when an informant told authorities that the offender was stockpiling, quote, weapons and ammunition, according to court documents. The informant, who was a friend, told authorities that Spafford had disfigured his hand in 2021 while working on homemade explosives. And that's a common thing. I'm going off fiction. In movies, you see bomb makers, they're missing fingers because little things happen. Prosecutor said he had only 2 fingers on his right hand, which means he got 30% off of manicures. That's a joke, guys. I'm kidding. It's a math joke. The informant also told authorities that the offender was using pictures of the president, an apparent reference to Joe Biden, for target practice, and that what he believed political assassinations should be brought back. Now, when I teach my classes, I always tell everyone, never put up a picture of anyone, particularly an elected official. Okay, they've got cartoons of Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il. They've got cartoon targets of Osama bin Laden. Like, those are okay. They're not actual photos. But there have been cases when Hillary Clinton was bigger in politics where people would put up a picture of Hillary Clinton and shoot at it. And you've got an ATF agent who happens to be there in the next booth who's shooting. Guess who gets arrested? Because it's an indicative of political violence. And there's a lot of humor out there, hey, I miss my ex-wife, but my aim is improving. Never put pictures of any real person up to shoot, unless it's like a pre-printed, that they have these pictures of terrorists holding people hostage. Like, if they're pre-printed, that's fine. Do not bring your own stuff. Now, I will say that one of the funniest targets I've ever seen, and this is when I worked at a shooting range, was someone brought a Green Bay Packers flag, and they were shooting at that. Okay, something that's not political violence. That's saying I don't like a sports team. And there was some humor in it, and I get that. Back to the case. Numerous police officers and bomb technicians searched the property on December 17th, and agents located the firearm and explosive devices, some of which have been hand-labeled as lethal, and some of which were loaded into a wearable vest, court documents state. Technicians detonated most of the devices on site because they were deemed unsafe to transport, though several were kept for analysis. At a hearing last week, the federal magistrate Judge Lawrence Leonard determined that Spafford could be released into house arrest at his mother's home, but agreed to keep him detained while the government files further arguments. I agree with that. This guy should not be let out. Wow. Now, there's no explosives in my house. There never were. How do people do this? I mean, people have a couple firecrackers. I'm not talking about that type of explosive. I'm talking about homemade bombs, a vest, a backpack. Look, that is so abnormal that, yes, there are nefarious activities associated with such behavior. Absolutely ridiculous. There were other forms of mass violence in the world in December also. So we know about the rented truck in New Orleans that actually was flying an ISIS flag, killed at least 15 people, injured 30 more. I hope that number does not go up. And while the attack is being investigated as an act of terrorism, there was a similar attack at a Christmas market in Magdeburg, Germany, that killed 5 and injured dozens. And it follows an FBI warning to law enforcement last month on December 6th for low-tech vehicle ramming attacks at outdoor crowds during the holiday season. The New Orleans attack seems to have been planned and to create as much harm as possible, including the attacker's use of an electric truck rented on a car-sharing app, which provided low-cost, easy access to a vehicle, and the apparent ease which the perpetrator planned and executed the attack, despite the FBI warning, suggests our national strategy for preventing mass violence and violent extremism is failing. And that goes back to my thing. People are anti-gun. I'm not anti-gun, I'm anti-violence. Doesn't matter what the implement is, whether it's a truck, a bomb, a gun. That's the problem, is the violence, not the implement. So a main prevention strategy for the government in this area is called secondary prevention, and it's almost entirely focused on stopping an already radicalized actor from effectively executing an attack. Other countries put more emphasis on both primary prevention, which means preventing people from becoming radicalized in the first place, and tertiary prevention, which is de-radicalization and disengagement of already committed extremists. Taken together, these 3 approaches are intended to reduce extremist groups' abilities to recruit and radicalize followers and mobilize them to violence. Secondary prevention, while important at reducing the risk of imminent violence attacks, is essentially see something, say something. It relies on timely and effective execution of security strategies like surveillance, monitoring, and infiltration of groups, alongside a healthy dose of sheer luck, often from good Samaritans, like the guy who reported the pipe bomb offender to the authorities, who report possible threats or concerning behaviors from individuals. A 2022 white supremacist plot to start a riot at an Idaho pride parade was thwarted. For example, when a tipster called to say that a little army was loading up into a U-Haul in the hotel parking lot. But most terrorist attacks in the U.S. come from people who have no affiliation with formal groups, even if they are inspired by propaganda produced by those groups. There is much unknown or unconfirmed about the New Orleans attackers' ideology, motive, and possible group affiliation. We've learned from other attacks that the lone wolf people, the lone wolf attackers, are really difficult to stop, especially if they are tight-lipped. And these extremists are almost always radicalized and mobilized through exposure to online propaganda, and in most cases they have no formal engagement with these extremist groups. It is impossible to infiltrate a group that doesn't exist, just as it is as hard to surveil a lone actor who isn't communicating with a terrorist cell leader. This is where primary prevention, a strategy focused on decreasing the attractiveness of violence and steering people away from radicalized pathways, can make a really difference, but only if we invest in it. Some primary prevention works through media and digital literacy efforts to help people be more skeptical of online content. People can learn to recognize manipulative propaganda and tactics and reject the overtures of bad actors who are trying to radicalize them, in part because people don't like to find out they are being manipulated and are smart enough to reject persuasive scammers and extremist tactics. Now, I'm in several online firearms groups, and there are people like this in the groups. The ones that I manage, they get kicked out relatively quickly. And it's ridiculous how they're like, oh, it's time to take up arms, like during the January 6th riots, or the insurrection, or whatever you want to call it. A rose is still a rose by any other name. I see this online. I see these people who promote violence. Like, what the heck are you doing? You are messed up, dude. Back to early prevention, it requires root cause analysis, addressing root causes that underpin people's attraction to these ideologies in the first place, including a yearning for a greater sense of meaning or purpose in their lives. This is especially true for veterans who have disproportionately engaged in violent extremism in ways that are both predictable and preventable. The vast majority of veterans, just like gun owners, are peaceful, law-abiding citizens. But for some, the loss of a sense of duty, belonging to a cause, and a heroic engagement they found in the military can create vulnerabilities as they transition to civilian lives. Propagandists exploit these vulnerabilities by offering a twisted sense of brotherhood and what can seem like a purposeful quest for individual significance. Prevention approaches can recognize vulnerable people and offer them other outlets to find meaning and engage heroically, as recent initiatives in Germany have done by working with youth sports and firefighting programs, or in the U.S. by engaging veterans as election monitors. The current approach to preventing mass atrocity attacks, in which we hope that every bad actor can be stopped in the nick of time, requires us to be perfect every time. But when any car is a weapon in any crowd, and too many of us spend our time alone, immersed in harmful online words, we can't rely on interrupting plots to keep us safe. Another year begins, and this moment of new resolutions, maybe we can resolve to do better, people.
I want my listeners to know that this is my dream, teaching people about safety. If it weren't for you, if it weren't for my listeners, I couldn't live my dream. So on behalf of my family and myself, I want to thank each and every one of you for allowing me to live my dream. And I also want to continue to live my dream, and I'm excited to continue to spread the word of safety. Recently, I began a new service as a conference keynote speaker. So if anyone would like for me to speak at future events, or if anyone knows of an introduction or would like to discuss how we can work with one another, I'd love to do just that. The keynote speaking website is www.stress2logic.com. That is STRESS, 2LOGIC.com. If you're aware of any conference speaking engagements where you'd like to have me speak, I'd love an introduction. You can always share my electronic business card, which is Marcus Melnick, MarcusMelnick.com. Now, back to the show.
In another article online, Supreme Court Chief Justice issues a warning ahead of the Trump White House. Ooh, this is interesting for all the people like, oh, it's a conservative court. Supreme Court Justice John Roberts issued a stark warning ahead of Donald Trump's second term in the White House. In his annual report on the federal judiciary, which was released Tuesday, the Chief Justice argued that the United States must maintain judicial independence, as he wrote about threats to the federal judicial system. It's not in the nature of the work to make everyone happy. Most cases have a winner and a loser, Roberts wrote in a 15-page report. Every administration suffers defeats in the court system, sometimes in cases with major ramifications for executive or legislative power or other consequential topics. Nevertheless, for the past several decades, the decision of the courts, popular or not, have been followed, and the nation has avoided standoffs that have plagued the 1950s and 1960s. Within the past few years, however, elected officials from across the political spectrum has raised the specter of open disregard for federal court rulings, hence gun laws in Illinois, if you really think about it. Roberts did not name Trump, Joe Biden, or any other lawmaker in his report, despite public spats with both executives. These dangerous suggestions, however sporadic, must be soundly rejected. Judicial independence is worth preserving. I love it. When he went on to quote the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who he said argued that an independent judiciary is essential to the rule of law in any land, but is vulnerable to assault. It can be shattered with society. Law exists to serve, does not take care to assure its preservation. Wow, that was a kind of gobbledygook there. I urge all Americans to appreciate this inheritance from our founding generation and cherish its endurance, Roberts wrote. He also quoted former Chief Justice Evans Hughes, who once remarked that the three branches of government must work in successful cooperation to make possible the effective functioning of the Department of Government, which is designed to safeguard with judicial impartiality and independence the interests of liberty. Our political system and economic strength depend on the rule of law, Roberts said. The Chief Justice went on to explain that the judiciary is under threat from intimidation and disinformation. Violence, intimidation, and defiance directed at judges because of their work undermine our republic and are wholly unacceptable, he said, arguing that not everyone engages in informed criticisms or anything remotely resembling it. He also argued that attempts to intimidate judges for their rulings and cases are inappropriate and should be vigorously opposed, and noted that while public officials and others can criticize rulings, they should also be aware that their comments can prompt dangerous reactions by officials. Disinformation on social media can magnify these distortions and be exploited even by foreign hostile state actors to exacerbate divisions. In some cases, Roberts noted, judges even had to wear bulletproof vests at public events, according to the New York Times. Threats targeting federal judges have been more than tripled over the past decades, according to the U.S. Marshals Service statistics. State court judges in Wisconsin and Maryland were even killed at their homes. Violence, intimidation, and defiance directed at judges because of their work do undermine our republic and are wholly unacceptable. The remarks came after an eventful year for the Supreme Court, with Roberts issuing a landmark decision over the summer when the highest court ruled that the President of the United States has immunity from prosecution for official acts in office. Republicans touted that ruling and another that halted efforts to disqualify Trump from the ballot in Colorado as major victories as the former president is about to take office. Democrats, however, including President Biden, criticized the highest court for its ruling in the immunity case, and Biden even wound up for calling for term limits in the aftermath, as well as an ethics code following reports of undisclosed trips and gifts from wealthy benefactors. Roberts and Trump's did clash in 2018 when the Chief Justice rebuked the then president for denouncing a judge who rejected his migrant asylum policy as an Obama judge. The Supreme Court is now expected to hear arguments next week on the constitutionality of a law that could ban TikTok. Trump pleaded with the Supreme Court to halt the implementation of Protecting Americans with Controlled Applications Act, which would ban the video sharing app by January 19th if it is not sold by its Chinese parent company by then. The incoming president's controversial conservative agenda is also likely to be legally challenged and end up before the nation's highest court, whose conservative majority includes 3 justices appointed by Trump during his first term. And I'm going to end the show with this last segment that is on a state of Washington Supreme Court case that is going to hear a high-capacity magazine ban case later this month. Both sides are gearing up for the next round in court in the fight in Washington state over the state's law prohibiting the attempted sale, manufacture, and distribution of, quote, high-capacity, end quote, magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. The case of State of Washington versus Gators Custom Guns Incorporated will be heard by the Washington Supreme Court on January 14th. This may impact the Illinois case. The Gators Guns in Kelso refused to comply with a ban on the sale of new high-capacity magazines of more than 10 rounds, arguing that the ban is unconstitutional. And the ban went into effect on July 1st, 2022. the law does not prohibit possession of high-capacity magazines. Gators custom guns were slapped with a civil investigative demand from the Office of the Washington State Attorney General. The AG uses CIDs to conduct investigations into business practices that violate the Consumer Protection Act. Silent Majority Foundation General Counsel Pete Serrano defended Gators Customs Guns' challenge, and at that point, the Attorney General's office filed suit alleging that the sale of so-called large-capacity magazines was illegal after Senate Bill 5078, passed in 2021, went into effect. Washingtonians' right to purchase high-capacity magazines was briefly restored last year on April 8th, when Cowlitz County Superior Judge Court ruled that the state's ban is unconstitutional. Soon after the motion was filed, the Attorney General and Governor-elect Bob Ferguson announced that Washington State Supreme Court agreed to stay the ruling. Wow, this sure sounds like Illinois to me. But for the 88 minutes the ban was lifted, Gators Guns opened its door to long lines of customers anxious to swoop in and swoop up the magazines in question. I don't know what we sold quantity-wise, but it was a lot, and it was all magazines. I just told customers I don't know what the limits are on your gold cards, but hey, make yourself happy. For now, the next stop is the Washington Supreme Court. If we can win on high-capacity magazines in Washington, that's going to send a huge ripple effect. It's a brick in the pond, not a rock, Serrano said, referring to other high-profile gun rights cases across the nation, which include federal courts considering rulings on AR-15 bans, gun-free parks, and ghost guns. So we will watch this with great vigor and hoping that the Illinois cases also shake out in the near future. One of the things I just want to mention is if you travel to another state, visit a gun store in the other state. It is a different animal than in Illinois. Suppressors, short-barreled rifles, all sorts of things you do need a tax stamp for, but they were very interesting to see behind the counter. Hope you're having a great, happy, healthy New Year, and we will be back next week with more content. Thank you.
We have monthly concealed carry license CCL classes in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. Dates can be seen at firearmmentor.com/classes. If you have a question, we can be reached at www.firearmmentorcard.com. That is our electronic business card, has all of our contact information and links in it. It's the easiest way to get a hold of us. Until next time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you at the shooting range. This is Marcus Melnick from Firearm Mentor signing off. The views expressed are not those of local community broadcasting, WYML LP, or its management, volunteers, or underwriters.